The first time I realized something was deeply wrong, it wasn't because of the letter. It was because two sheriff's cruisers were parked at the edge of a neighborhood that should not exist, and a woman in a tailored blazer was screaming my name across a hillside like she owned the mountain. "You don't belong here," Linda Fairchild shrieked, pointing at me while families stood frozen on their porches. "He's trespassing on private community property. I want him removed now." I looked past her. Streets, driveways, mailboxes, swing sets, flags, gardens, more than 100 homes carved into land that my grandfather once rode cattle across. One deputy stepped toward me. "Sir, are you Matthew Collins?" I nodded. Linda smiled. That's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was a war. I hadn't set foot on that land in over 20 years. The last time I'd seen it, I was barely old enough to drive, standing beside my grandfather's rusted pickup while the wind bent the tall grass in slow waves across the hills. He made me promise that day, standing at the fence line, his hands on my shoulders, that no matter what happened in life, the land would stay in the family. No selling, no deals, no shortcuts, just stewardship. Life had a way of pushing that promise into the background. Careers, divorces, the kind of years that pile up faster than you expect. I stayed in Wyoming most of my adult life, working contracts, moving job to job, and only thought about the Colorado property when tax season came around, and I signed a renewal on a small stack of paperwork I barely read anymore. Then the letter arrived. Not a friendly letter, not even neutral. It accused me of interfering with the operations of Highland Crest Estates Homeowners Association and demanded that I cease all unauthorized presence on community property. I remember staring at the return address. Highland Crest Estates, Park County, Colorado, and the address it referenced, the exact legal parcel ID, was my grandfather's land. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. Those happen, but something about the tone felt too deliberate, too aggressive, too confident, like the sender knew exactly what they were doing. So 2 days later, I loaded my truck and drove south. Park County hadn't changed much. Long highways, big sky, mountains rolling out in slow blue layers. But the closer I got to the coordinates on my deed, the stranger things felt. The dirt road that used to lead up into open pasture was gone. In its place, fresh asphalt, street signs, curbs, and mailboxes. I slowed the truck, kept driving, and then the land opened up into something that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. An entire neighborhood, not one or two houses, not a half-finished development. A full suburban community carved directly into what had once been my family's land. Curving streets, rows of modern homes, driveways, playgrounds, kids' bikes in the yards, flags on porches. It looked like something that had taken years to build. I pulled over near the entrance sign, Highland Crest Estates. I sat there for a full minute without moving. That land had been empty when I left it. No easements. No development agreements. No sale. My grandfather's trust documents were ironclad. I still owned every acre. I drove slowly through the subdivision, heart pounding, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew was legally impossible. Every turn felt like stepping further into someone else's dream built on top of my family's history. Near the Central Park, I saw her for the first time. Linda Fairchild. She was standing near the community sign, phone in hand, heels planted on the concrete like she owned the entire valley. Bold navy business suit, gold jewelry catching the sunlight, blonde hair pulled tight at the back of her head. The kind of posture that came from years of telling people what to do and expecting it done. She spotted my truck almost immediately. Her expression changed. Not confusion. Recognition. She marched toward me before I even shut the engine off. "You need to leave," she snapped, voice sharp as glass. "You are not authorized to be here." I stepped out slowly. "My name is Matthew Collins. This land." She cut me off with a raised hand. "This is private community property. You are trespassing. I am the HOA president, and I will call the sheriff if you don't remove yourself immediately." I pulled the folded deed from my jacket. "This property has been in my family since 1952. I have no idea what you've built here, but none of it is on land you own. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Then it vanished. She laughed, loud, deliberate, for the neighbors to hear. "That's not how this works, cowboy," she said. "You don't get to wander in here and make claims. This land belongs to Highland Crest Estates. You've been reported. The sheriff is already on the way." That's when the gravity of it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. And standing there, surrounded by houses that should never have existed, I realized I was looking at the beginning of something that would unravel far more than just an HOA. I didn't stay in that neighborhood much longer after the first confrontation. The look in Linda Fairchild's eyes wasn't the look of someone confused. It wasn't the look of someone realizing they had made a mistake. It was the look of someone who already knew the answer and intended to crush whatever stood in the way of it. I drove straight to Fairplay and checked into a small roadside hotel. The room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old carpet, but it was quiet, and that was enough. I spread my grandfather's paperwork across the bed: the original deed, survey maps, trust documents, tax records going back decades, and took photos of everything. Then I made the call. Alan Becker, my family's attorney in Denver, answered on the third ring. "Matt," he said, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. You're not going to believe this." I told him, "But I need you in Park County." Immediately, he didn't laugh. He didn't question it. He told me he'd be there the next morning. That night, I drove back toward the property, parking at a turnout above the development where the old ranch fence used to run. The hills were quiet. Lights glowed from dozens of windows below. Families cooking dinner, kids doing homework, dogs barking, all of it built on land that legally belonged to me. It felt unreal. The next morning, Alan arrived in a silver rental sedan, tie-loosened, briefcase in hand. We met at the hotel cafe and went through everything page by page. He grew more silent with each document. "This is bad," he said finally. "Not for you, for them." We drove to the county records office before noon. That was where the second shock hit. According to the county database, the land had been rezoned and approved for residential development for years earlier. Multiple permits, environmental impact studies, construction authorizations, all of it logged as clean and complete, except none of it existed in the state registry. Alan pulled the cross records on his laptop, his jaw tightening. "Someone mirrored these records locally without filing them at the state level," he said. "That's not an accident." By mid-afternoon, we were standing again at the entrance of Highland Crest Estates. Linda was waiting. This time she had company. Two men in identical polo shirts with the HOA logo, arms crossed like security. "Didn't I tell you to leave?" she snapped the moment she saw me. Her blonde hair was short and messy today, strands slipping loose around her face. Suit jacket unbuttoned, agitation written into every movement. Alan stepped forward. "Linda Fairchild, I'm Alan Becker, legal counsel from Matthew Collins. We're here to inform you that your entire development sits on my client's property." She laughed again, loud, sharp, performative. "Your client doesn't own anything here," she said. "You people think you can bully communities with old paperwork. Not in this county." Alan handed her copies of the deed. She didn't even look at them. "I'm calling the sheriff." She did. When the deputy arrived, Alan calmly explained the situation and handed over the documents. The deputy read, then stepped aside to radio his supervisor. Linda's smile disappeared. Residents began to gather. Phones came out. Murmurs spread. The deputy returned and said the words that changed everything. "Ma'am, this land ownership is in dispute. No one is being removed today." Linda lost it. She started yelling. Not just at us, at the deputy, at the neighbors, at the world. "You're all trespassing on stolen land," she screamed. "This man is trying to destroy your homes. I told you he was dangerous." The residents looked between us in confusion and fear. Alan leaned toward me. "This isn't just civil. This is criminal." And standing there, while Linda Fairchild shouted herself hoarse in the middle of a neighborhood that shouldn't exist, I knew the fight had officially begun. Alan didn't wait. By the time the sun went down on that second day, he had already filed formal notices with the county, placed a temporary claim against the land records, and initiated an emergency motion to preserve all development documentation connected to Highland Crest Estates. He also contacted a surveyor he trusted, a woman named Marcy Hale, who had worked boundary disputes across half of Colorado. She arrived the next morning. We met her near the old fence line that once marked my grandfather's western boundary. The wooden posts were gone now, replaced by fresh concrete curbing and street lamps, but the survey maps in her hands told a story the asphalt couldn't erase. "This whole subdivision," Marcy said, tapping the blueprint with her pen, "is sitting squarely inside your parcel. Not even close." She looked up at the neighborhood. This wasn't a mistake. Someone built this knowing exactly where your land was. We moved deeper into the development. Children rode bikes along streets that technically belonged to my family. Construction crews hammered away on the last few unfinished homes near the ridge. The sound of it all, progress built on fraud. Near the main construction zone, we saw Linda again. This time she wasn't yelling. She was watching us. Blonde hair pulled tight, sunglasses on, arms crossed, posture rigid. Two men in work vests stood with her. When we approached, her voice dropped to something cold. "You people are very persistent." Alan handed her a copy of the survey results. She scanned the page. Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand how this works," she said quietly. "This community is already established. You're too late." That was the moment Alan's patience broke. "No," he said. "What's too late is your opportunity to fix this quietly." Linda's lips curled. She leaned closer to me. "You walk away from this," she whispered, "or you're going to have problems you don't want." That night, my hotel door was tampered with. Not forced, just scratched around the lock. A warning. The following morning, Alan received a call from someone inside the county planning office. The woman wouldn't give her name, only that she had reviewed Highland Crest permits months earlier, and every single one of them had been denied. Someone changed the status afterward, she said. They were never approved. Not one. She emailed Alan internal copies of the original denials. The paper trail was becoming radioactive. We drove straight to the sheriff's department. Detective Harrison met us in a small interview room. He listened. He read the documents. He made notes. When we showed him the altered county records, he leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just zoning fraud," he said. "This is felony territory." And somewhere out there, Linda Fairchild already knew it. By the end of that week, the story was no longer just ours. Alan filed for an emergency injunction in the Park County District Court before sunrise Monday. By noon, the judge had already reviewed the survey evidence, the falsified permit chain, the internal county denials, and the original deed records going back to 1952. The ruling came down that afternoon. All construction at Highland Crest Estates was ordered to immediately cease. No more pouring foundations. No more framing. No more electrical work. No more sales. Everything froze. When we arrived at the main construction site near the eastern ridge, the effect was surreal. Nail guns lay silent. Cement trucks were parked with their drums still half full. Workers stood around in confused clusters, phones in hand, waiting for instructions that would never come. Linda Fairchild stormed in less than 10 minutes later. She was in a fury. Her blonde hair was short and messy, her bold business suit wrinkled, her face flushed with rage as she marched straight up to the sheriff's deputies who had arrived to enforce the injunction. "You have no authority to do this," she screamed. "This is private development property. I will sue every single one of you." The deputy calmly handed her the court order. She slapped it away. Residents began gathering at the edge of the construction zone. Fear, anger, confusion, all mixing together as word spread that their entire community had just been legally shut down. Linda turned toward them. "This man did this," she yelled, pointing at me. "This outsider millionaire wants your homes. He wants you on the street. He's lying about the land. Don't believe him." People stared at me, some angry, some scared, some uncertain. Alan stepped forward and raised his voice. "This land legally belongs to Matthew Collins. We have documentation proving that your HOA and its development partners built this entire community without lawful authority. The crowd exploded with noise. Questions, accusations, fearful shouts. Linda tried to shout them down, her voice cracking as she ordered residents to go back inside, threatening fines and community violations. The sheriff's deputy pulled her aside. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." She snapped, "I will not calm down. This is my community." That night, Linda went on local television. She told the anchors I was a wealthy investor trying to seize property from working families. She cried on camera. She framed herself as a protector of the neighborhood, and it worked for about 24 hours. Because the next morning, Alan released the documents. Every permit denial, every falsified record, every email trail. The public narrative collapsed. Residents started showing up at my hotel. Quietly, one by one, they told me about threats Linda had made, about fines she imposed for questioning her, about meetings where she told them not to talk to county officials, about intimidation disguised as HOA governance. One woman shook while she spoke. She told us you were dangerous. That same night, my truck was vandalized, paint across the side, windows scratched, a note left on the windshield. "Walk away." The next evening, someone tried my hotel door. They didn't get in. I hired private security. Because Linda Fairchild was no longer fighting with paperwork. She was fighting with fear. The injunction should have slowed things down. Instead, it lit a fuse. By the end of that week, Highland Crest Estates felt less like a neighborhood and more like a pressure cooker. Construction crews vanished overnight. For sale signs appeared on lawns and were torn down just as quickly. Residents whispered in small groups instead of talking openly, eyes darting whenever someone unfamiliar walked past. Linda Fairchild didn't disappear. She went underground. Her public appearances stopped, but her influence didn't. HOA emails began flooding residents' inboxes, official-looking notices warning them not to speak to outside parties, threatening fines for disrupting community cohesion, and reminding them of obscure bylaws that suddenly mattered more than ever. People started reaching out to Alan directly, quietly. One man met us in a grocery store parking lot. Another waited until after dark to knock on my hotel door. A young couple sat in their car with the engine running, windows cracked, terrified someone might see them talking to us. They all told the same story. Linda had warned them not to cooperate. She told them the county was against them. She told them if they didn't stay united, they would lose their homes. She framed me as the enemy, as someone who would take everything if given the chance. One woman's voice shook as she spoke. She said if we talked, our HOA privileges would be revoked. Parking, access to the park, everything. That was when Alan filed an emergency motion for a residence protection order. And that was when the threats became personal. It started with my truck. I walked out of the hotel one morning to find deep scratches carved along the driver's side. The tires were intact, but someone had scrawled words into the dust on the hood. Last warning. The hotel manager reviewed the cameras. The footage cut out at exactly the wrong moment. That night, I didn't sleep. The following evening, Alan received an anonymous call. The voice was distorted, rushed. "Tell your client to walk away. This isn't his fight." We reported it to the sheriff immediately. Detective Harrison didn't sugarcoat it. "This is no longer just civil intimidation," he said. "This is organized." The next escalation came 2 days later. I was back in my room when the smoke alarm went off. At first, I thought it was a false alert. Then I smelled it, burning plastic, sharp and unnatural. I opened the door and saw smoke creeping along the hallway ceiling. Guests were shouting. Someone was pounding on doors. The fire was small, contained. A trash bin in the service hallway had been ignited deliberately, but the message was clear. They could reach me anywhere. The sheriff's department evacuated the floor. Firefighters extinguished the flames. Detective Harrison stood with me outside, watching the smoke drift into the cold mountain air. "This was meant to scare you," he said, "but it crossed a line." That night, I hired private security. 2 men, quiet, professional. They stayed outside my room, rotated shifts, logged every movement. It felt surreal, standing in a quiet Colorado town, guard like someone in a mob trial. Meanwhile, Alan kept digging. The deeper he went, the uglier it got. Emails surfaced between Linda Fairchild and a county code enforcement officer. Payments disguised as consulting fees. Clarifications exchanged for approvals. Language that danced just enough around legality to fool casual readers, but not investigators. Even worse, the development company tied to Highland Crest Estates wasn't just an HOA affiliate. It belonged to Linda's husband. When Alan laid out for me in his office, I felt something shift inside my chest. This was never about housing, he said. This was a coordinated land grab. The final insult came when Linda's legal team filed a claim of adverse possession. They argued that because the community had existed openly for years, ownership should transfer. Alan laughed when he read it. They're desperate, he said, and desperate people make mistakes. But desperation makes people dangerous too. And standing there, watching the mountains darken outside the window, I realized this fight was no longer about land. It was about exposing something rotten that had been hiding in plain sight. By the time the fire investigation began, Matthew no longer slept. Not real sleep. He would lie on the stiff hotel mattress with the lights off, eyes open, listening for every sound. Footsteps in the hallway, the wind rattling the window, distant sirens that never seemed distant enough. His phone remained in his hand, even as his arm went numb, his thumb hovering near the emergency call button. The fire had changed everything. This was no longer a property dispute. This was no longer an HOA power grab. This was something far uglier. Detective Harrison met him the next morning outside the sheriff's office. Harrison was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, calm, with the kind of eyes that had seen every version of human greed. He motioned Matthew into an interview room and shut the door. "Mr. Collins," he said quietly, setting a thick file on the table, "what you're in the middle of is no longer civil. We're moving this into a full criminal investigation." Matthew exhaled slowly. "About damn time." Harrison opened the file. Inside were photos of the fire damage, copies of threatening notes, security footage from the hotel, records from the sheriff's office, and financial statements seized under warrant. Then Harrison slid one document forward. Emails, printed, highlighted, flagged. At the top, Linda Fairchild, President, Ridgeview Crest HOA. To Brian Hensley, County Code Enforcement. Matthew's jaw tightened as he scanned the messages. They were careful, polite, professional, but between the lines, the meaning was unmistakable. We discussed compensation for the delays. The revised approval should reflect our prior understanding. Let me know when the recording office makes the correction. Matthew looked up. That's bribery. Harrison nodded. And that's just the surface. He slid another page. Wire transfers. Shell companies. Consulting fees routed through 3 LLCs before landing in Hensley's account. Matthew's hands curled into fists. She bought the county. Parts of it, Harrison said. 2 clerks in the recorder's office. 1 planning supervisor. A zoning analyst. All on Fairchild's payroll. Matthew let out a slow, bitter laugh. So the whole damn development is built on fraud. Forgery, bribery, falsification of public records, conspiracy, obstruction, arson, intimidation, and we're still counting. Harrison leaned forward. And that's just what we can already prove. Matthew's chest felt tight. What about the homeowners? The families living there? That's the tragedy, Harrison said. Most of them are victims, too. They bought houses built on stolen land with fake approvals. They had no idea. Matthew closed his eyes for a moment. 100 families. Kids. Dogs. Lawns. Birthday parties. Christmas lights. All sitting on his grandfather's land because one woman decided the rules didn't apply to her. Harrison continued. We've subpoenaed Fairchild Development Group's internal records. The numbers don't add up. We're looking at money laundering, tax fraud, wire fraud, possibly more. Matthew stared at the table. So what happens now? Harrison's voice hardened. Now we dismantle them. That afternoon, Matthew met with Alan in Denver. The attorney's office looked out over the city skyline, sunlight glinting off the glass towers, the world outside blissfully unaware of the criminal operation unraveling beneath it. Alan laid the documents out across the conference table. "They're finished," he said. Matthew raised an eyebrow. "You sound confident." "They tried to claim adverse possession." Matthew scoffed. "On 80 acres? With forged permits?" Alan nodded. Judge laughed out of court, then forwarded everything to the state prosecutor. Matthew leaned back in the chair. "So the Fairchild empire collapses." Alan's lips pressed together. "With enough pressure, yes, but she won't go quietly." As if on cue, Matthew's phone vibrated. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low and strained. "You Matthew Collins?" "Yes." "This is a warning. Walk away. You don't know who you're messing with." Matthew's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The line went dead. Matthew slowly lowered the phone. Alan's face had hardened. "That's witness intimidation." Matthew stood. "No, that's desperation." By the end of the week, arrests began quietly. First one clerk, then another, then the zoning analyst. County offices buzzed with whispers. Files were seized. Servers imaged. Doors closed. Local news finally caught wind of it. And at the center of every headline, Ridgeview Crest HOA president under investigation. Linda Fairchild, once the untouchable queen of the hills, now refused to leave her gated mansion without security. Matthew watched the coverage from the hotel bar. The bartender nodded toward the TV. "That her?" Matthew's eyes stayed locked on the screen. "Yes," he said. "That woman looks like trouble." Matthew didn't answer. He was thinking about the land, his grandfather's land, and how close it had come to being erased by greed. The war was no longer about ownership. It was about justice. And it was only getting started. By the time the indictment paperwork came down, the storm had already swallowed Linda Fairchild whole. The county DA's office filed charges on a Wednesday morning. Fraud, conspiracy, bribery, forgery, money laundering, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, arson connected to the hotel fire. More than 20 counts across 3 jurisdictions. And that was just the first wave. When I saw the charges listed on the news screen in the diner, where I was eating breakfast, my coffee went cold in my hands. Linda's face appeared on the television moments later. Her once perfect posture was gone. Her bold confidence replaced by a hollow stare. Blonde hair pulled tight, business suit wrinkled, eyes darting between microphones as reporters shouted questions. "Ms. Fairchild, did you knowingly authorize construction on stolen land? Did you bribe county officials? Is your husband's development company involved in laundering funds?" She didn't answer a single one. 2 hours later, sheriff's deputies arrived at her mansion on the hillside. The same steps where she had screamed at me weeks earlier were now lined with officers. When they walked her out in handcuffs, cameras captured everything. Her clenched jaw, trembling hands, the look of disbelief on her face as neighbors gathered at the gates. I didn't feel joy. I felt something quieter, something steadier. Justice. The HOA's grip on Cedar Ridge collapsed overnight. The management company shut its doors. The HOA board resigned en masse. Residents who had once been afraid of fines and intimidation finally spoke openly. They flooded the county with statements, threat letters, emails, audio recordings of Linda screaming at them in meetings. The judge's ruling came next. The court confirmed that the entire development had been constructed illegally on my family's land. Every house, every road, every utility line, every structure, all of it, mine. The room went silent when the ruling was read. Linda's lawyers stared at the table. The Marston Development Group's attorneys didn't even try to argue. 100 homes, $8 million in illegal construction, returned to me. The county created an emergency relocation and compensation program for the families who had been deceived by Linda and her partners. They weren't my enemies. They were victims too. Many of them shook my hand after the hearing. Some cried. Some apologized for believing the HOA's lies. We rebuilt trust the slow, hard way. I sold portions of the land to families at fair value. donated acreage for public use, preserved the forested ridge my grandfather had loved. Linda Fairchild was sentenced 6 months later, 12 years in federal prison. Her husband received 15. Multiple county officials were removed, prosecuted, and banned from public service for life. Cedar Ridge was reborn under new governance, new laws, and new leadership, transparent, accountable, human. And every time I walk that land now, I hear my grandfather's voice in the wind. You kept your promise, son. I did. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you angry in the best way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. And remember, sometimes standing your ground doesn't just protect your land, it protects your future. I'll see you in the next one.